Dawn broke over the Serengeti like a whispered promise, the savanna waking in shades of honey and gold. In a shelter of thorn and shadow, a lioness named Zuri lay exhausted, her body still trembling from the long night's work. The air hung cool and expectant. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then came the sound that changes everything. A cub's first cry. Another followed close behind. Zuri shifted, her tongue working steadily, cleaning blood and afterbirth from two small bodies the color of dried grass. They pressed against her warmth, searching blindly for milk, for life, for the one thing every newborn knows without learning. She curved around them, a fortress of muscle and devotion. The third cry was different, thinner, as if it traveled from somewhere far away. Zuri lifted her head and saw what the emerging light was only beginning to reveal. The third cub was not golden, not tan, not any shade that belongs to this yellow world. He was black, midnight black, absorbing light instead of reflecting it, like a piece of the departing night that refused to leave. Zuri went still, as if some ancient memory had stirred in her blood. Then she lowered her head and began to lick him too, slower this time, more deliberately, as though her tongue needed to confirm what her eyes could not quite believe. He was hers. Before we begin this incredible journey, I want to know, are you ready for a story that will challenge everything you thought you knew about love, survival, and second chances? If you're watching this right now, drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you're joining us from. Are you in New York, Canada, London, Sydney? Let us know. And if stories like this, real stories about resilience, hope, and the bonds that refuse to break, if these are the kinds of stories that move you, hit that like button right now and subscribe so you never miss another one. Now, let me take you back to a dawn in the Serengeti, where everything began. A mile distant, on a rise where the grass swayed like a golden ocean, a man adjusted his camera lens. Ethan Carter had spent enough years in this country to understand how morning moves across the land. He had learned patience here, learned to sit motionless until his heartbeat matched the rhythm of the bush. He knew this pride by their scars and their patterns, knew Zuri by the distinctive mark beneath her left eye. He had not come searching for miracles. He had come for honest work, for truth captured in light and shadow. But when he found the den and looked through his viewfinder, the first image showed him something no textbook had prepared him for. He leaned forward, hardly daring to breathe, though his own chest rose and fell with something close to wonder. The third cub moved, and the lens caught it. A small, trembling shape of black fur that gleamed faintly where the new sun touched it. Ethan's mind raced through every lecture, every field guide, every scientific paper he'd ever studied, and then let them all go. He simply watched. Zuri worked with careful attention, licking the dark body until it shone wet and new against her pale golden coat. The cub squirmed, reaching toward her with one tiny paw, then dragged himself, slower than his brothers, as if gravity itself weighed heavier on him, toward the warmth where his siblings had already claimed their place. Zuri nudged him closer with her nose and went still, holding space for him with that particular patience only a mother possesses, letting him discover on his own where the world begins and where safety lives. The sun climbed higher. Morning flies appeared and were swept away by the lazy movement of Zuri's tail. The two golden cubs made small, contented sounds as they nursed. The dark one rested, gathering strength, then tried again. His mouth finally found what it sought, and his whole body trembled with the effort of pulling life into himself. Zuri breathed steadily through her nose, a calm, rhythmic sound. She kept one foreleg braced near the den entrance, eyes half closed but ears alert, listening for anything that did not belong to this fragile morning. It did not take long for the others to notice. One by one, shapes emerged from the tall grass, lionesses moving with the fluid certainty of predators who have witnessed birth 100 times before. Amara came first, the pride's matriarch, her movements measured, her head held high with the authority of years. Two younger females followed at a respectful distance, pausing to scent the air, to read what the wind carried. Zuri lifted her head but did not stand. Amara stopped just beyond the shadow line of the den. She looked at Zuri first, then at the two golden cubs, and something softened in her expression, the way it always does when a lioness sees new life. She leaned in, nose forward, breathing them in. The milk scent, the damp warmth, the delicate pulse of something barely begun. A low, approving rumble passed through her chest. Then the dark cub moved. It was only a small shift, a push of his hind legs, a tilt of his head as he struggled to maintain his hold. But the light caught him just so, marking him like ink spilled on parchment. Amara's ears tipped back, not in aggression, but in something older than anger. Hesitation, uncertainty, a question without words. The younger females held perfectly still, their mouths slightly open as they drew his scent. One of them lowered her head as if to move closer, then pulled back as though she'd reached for solid ground and found only air. Through his camera lens, Ethan watched the moment crystallize. He knew the scientific term melanism, the genetic opposite of albinism, occurring perhaps once in tens of millions of births. He knew how rare this was, how beautiful. He also knew, with a sinking certainty that settled like stone in his chest, exactly what it meant. In a world where survival depends on blending with the earth, this cub had been born to stand out, born to be seen. And in the Serengeti, being seen means death. He wrote a single line in the notebook beside him. Day 1. 3 cubs. 1 black. Pride uncertain. Watch carefully. Zuri kept her eyes on Amara. Nothing in her face changed. No challenge. No plea. Only watchfulness. Only the tip of her tail moved. A small, uncertain flicker. The dark cub finished nursing and rested his chin against his mother's fur, unaware of the invisible current of judgment flowing through the air. Amara stayed motionless for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, the tension in her shoulders eased. She stepped back, not far, just enough to return the den to its small circle of privacy. The younger lionesses followed her lead. There was no ceremony, no announcement, only the quiet recognition that something had entered their world that would require watching. Something that did not quite fit. The sun rose higher. Heat began to shimmer in waves across the plain. Zuri shifted again, stretching a hind leg carefully. The dark cub tumbled, then righted himself with the determined clumsiness of the very new. He made a small sound that was neither cry nor sigh. Zuri answered by resting her chin lightly across his back. A mother's reassurance that asks for nothing, changes nothing, simply is. Ethan lowered his camera and let his naked eyes do the work. He felt that old, familiar ache that sometimes comes when the wild shows you something both simple and profound. He wanted to believe that this morning would be enough, that warmth and milk and a mother's body could write a good beginning to any story. But even from his distant hill, the land itself spoke a different truth. The grass was gold, the earth was dust, and everything here had learned long ago to wear the color of the sun. He looked once more at the dark cub and felt a slow tightening behind his ribs, the kind that tells you a choice is approaching, though you cannot yet see its shape. Somewhere in his mind, a question formed that would haunt him in the days to come. When does bearing witness become bearing responsibility? And when the answer demands you choose between the rules you've sworn to follow and the humanity you cannot abandon, what then? The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of distant rain that might never arrive. And in a den of thorn and stone, a black cub slept pressed against his mother's heart, unaware that his first breath had already begun counting down to an impossible choice. The sun had fully claimed the sky by the time the birth was complete. Zuri lay in the shelter of thorns, her breathing finally steady, 3 small bodies pressed against her belly. The 2 golden cubs, strong and vigorous, had already found their rhythm, nursing with the greedy certainty of those who belong. The third, darker and smaller, struggled. His movements were slower, more hesitant, as though he sensed already that the world had not been made with him in mind. Zuri licked each one in turn, her tongue working methodically, cleaning, warming, claiming. When she reached the black cub, she paused only briefly, then continued with the same fierce devotion she'd shown the others. He was hers. That was enough. Ethan sat motionless on the ridge, his camera still pressed to his eye though his hands had begun to shake. He'd photographed thousands of births over the years, gazelles, elephants, cheetahs, lions, but this was different. This was something that shouldn't exist. A genetic anomaly so rare it lived mostly in theory. Melanism in a lion cub. Beautiful, yes, and fatal. He clicked the shutter again and again, documenting what felt less like a beginning and more like a countdown. By midday, the pride had gathered. Imara arrived first, her body language radiating the quiet authority that came with leading through droughts and territorial wars. She approached the den slowly, respectfully, the way lionesses always do when new life has entered the world. The younger females hung back, watching, waiting for permission. Imara sniffed the air, then lowered her head to examine the cubs. The first 2 received gentle nuzzles, approving rumbles deep in her chest. Then she reached the third. Her ears flattened. The rumble died. She sniffed again, as if trying to reconcile what her eyes saw with what her nose confirmed. This was Zuri's cub, but it was also wrong. Dangerously, unmistakably wrong. She released a low, uncertain growl, not aggression, not yet, but something close to confusion, to doubt. The younger lionesses shifted uneasily behind her, sensing the tension, reading the unspoken language of their matriarch's body. One of them made a soft chuffing sound, a question without words. Zuri lifted her head, meeting Imara's gaze. She did not challenge. She did not retreat. She simply held her ground, her body curved protectively around all 3 of her cubs. For a long moment, the 2 lionesses stared at each other, and the air between them seemed to thicken with everything that could not be said. That evening, Ethan showed the photos to Dr. Grace Holloway over a crackling radio connection. Her silence stretched long enough that he thought he'd lost the signal. Then her voice came through, quiet and certain. Melanism. 1 in tens of millions. Another pause. Beautiful, Ethan. But you know what happens next. He did. He'd known from the moment he saw that small black shape against the golden grass. He'd been watching long enough to understand how the Serengeti works, how survival here demands conformity, how difference, no matter how magnificent, becomes a death sentence written in fur and bone. He looked through his lens one more time. The 3 cubs were nursing, their small bodies rising and falling in the rhythm of new life. Two disappeared into their mother's golden coat. One stood out like ink spilled on parchment, a miracle and a tragedy, born in the same breath. By the third day, the difference had become impossible to ignore. While his brothers grew plump and strong, tumbling over each other with increasing confidence, Kivuli remained small, his movements uncertain. He nursed as often as the others, but something in his body seemed to resist the nourishment, as though even his own flesh understood he did not belong here. The golden cubs played with the careless violence of predators in training, their mock battles teaching them the skills they would need to survive. When Kivuli tried to join them, they bowled him over without malice, simply unaware of their own strength. He would right himself and try again, always trying, always falling behind. The pride kept their distance now. Where once the lionesses had gathered near Zuri's den to rest and socialize, they now settled elsewhere, just far enough to make their discomfort clear. When Kivuli wandered too close to the main group, exploring with that innocent curiosity all cubs possess, a young lioness named Nima hissed, a sharp, warning sound that froze him mid-step. Another day, another lioness swiped at him, claws extended, stopping just short of his face. He tumbled backward with a small, shocked squeak that carried across the clearing. Before anyone else could move, Zuri was there, roaring with a fury that sent the aggressor retreating. But as she stood over her cub, sides heaving, the exhaustion showed. She could not be everywhere at once. She could not fight them all. "You're getting too close." Grace's voice crackled through the radio, tinged with concern that went beyond professional interest. Ethan lowered his binoculars, his jaw tight. "I'm documenting. You're investing," she corrected. "And you know what happens when we invest." He did know. He'd seen it before, researchers who intervened, who tried to rewrite nature's harsh mathematics, who ended up doing more harm than good. Instincts have a longer memory than love. "Ethan," Grace continued, her voice softer now, "the pride will decide. Not Zuri. Not you. The pride." From his ridge, Ethan watched the pattern repeat itself. Kivuli sitting alone while his brothers played. Zuri positioning herself between her dark cub and the others, a living barrier that grew thinner with each passing day. The silent standoffs between her and Amara, their bodies speaking a language older than words, warning postures, stiff tails, eyes that promised consequences. On the 8th day, the pride hunted. Ethan followed at a distance, documenting their coordination, their grace. They moved through the golden grass like shadows, closing in on a small herd of gazelles. But Zuri kept glancing back toward where she'd left the cubs, distracted, her movements slightly off rhythm. The gazelles startled early, their alarm calls piercing the air as they scattered. The hunt failed. Hungry lionesses returned to camp with empty bellies and short tempers. Amara's gaze found Zuri across the clearing and held there, cold and unforgiving. The message needed no translation. This cannot continue. That night, Kivuli curled against his mother's chest, unaware that his presence had begun to cost more than love could pay. The sun hung low on the 39th day, painting the savannah in shades of copper and gold. The pride moved through the tall grass like a single organism, each lioness knowing her position without signals, without sound. Amara led, her body low and controlled, eyes fixed on the antelope herd grazing 200 yards ahead. On the flanks, the younger females mirrored her movements, patient and deadly. This hunt had to succeed. 3 failures in a week had left everyone hungry, the cubs crying at night, the adults growing gaunt and irritable. Zuri took her position on the left wing, but her focus was divided. Kivuli had followed her despite her low warning growls, curious as always, unaware that his presence broke every rule of the hunt. She tried to keep him hidden, tried to use her body as a shield, but he was restless, pushing forward to see what held his mother's attention so completely. Then it happened. Kivuli stepped into a patch of late afternoon sunlight, and his black fur caught the light like a signal fire. For one suspended moment, everything was still. Then the lead antelope's head snapped up. The alarm call, sharp, urgent, unmistakable, shattered the silence. The herd exploded into motion, dust rising in their wake as they scattered across the plain. The lionesses surged forward in a desperate attempt, but it was already over. The element of surprise, their only advantage, had vanished the instant that small dark shape had glowed against the golden grass. Amara's roar of frustration echoed across the emptiness, a sound of hunger and fury and something deeper than anger. Back at the den site, the cubs' answering cries drifted on the wind, thin, plaintive, asking for food that would not come. The pride regrouped slowly, sides heaving, eyes hollow with exhaustion and defeat. Then, as one, they turned to look at Zuri. Amara approached, her movements deliberate, each step heavy with purpose. The other lionesses formed a semicircle behind her, their solidarity absolute. Zuri stood over Kivuli, her head lowered, but she did not retreat. The confrontation needed no words. Amara's body spoke clearly. This ends now. The dark cub goes, or you all do. Zuri's tail lashed once, twice, the only sign of the war raging inside her. She looked at Amara, then at the others, reading her own future in their closed faces. Slowly, the pride began to move away, settling at a distance that spoke louder than any growl. The isolation was complete. Night fell heavy and moonless. Ethan watched through his night vision scope as Zuri lay awake, her golden cubs sleeping peacefully on either side. Kivuli was pressed against her chest, his small body rising and falling with each breath, trusting and unaware. Zuri's shoulders shook. Whether from cold or something deeper, Ethan could not tell. He lowered the scope, his own hands trembling, and understood with terrible clarity what dawn would bring. Some choices are not choices at all. Some love is not enough. Dawn came too soon and not soon enough. Zuri rose before the light had fully claimed the sky, her movements careful, deliberate, carrying the weight of a decision made in the darkest hours. She nuzzled her golden cubs where they slept, memorizing the warmth of them, then turned to Kivuli. Gently, she nudged him away from his brothers, away from the only home he had known. He blinked awake, confused but trusting, and followed when she began to walk. They traveled in silence, Zuri leading him toward the distant thorn patch where she had labored to bring him into the world. Kivuli trotted behind her, occasionally pouncing at shadows, at grasshoppers, still playful, still innocent. He did not understand that every step carried him further from his brothers, from the pride, from any chance of belonging. He only knew his mother was near, and that was enough. When they reached the thorns, Zuri stopped. She lowered her head until her nose touched his, holding the connection for a long, suspended moment. Then she licked his face, once, twice, her tongue moving slowly, as if trying to press his scent permanently into memory. Kivuli leaned into her, purring softly, unaware that this gentleness was goodbye. Then Zuri turned and walked away. Kivuli watched for a moment, uncertain, then followed. "Mama," his small voice called, a sound that was barely more than a squeak. "Mama." She kept walking. He ran after her, his short legs struggling through the grass. "Mama!" Zuri spun, her movement sharp and final. The growl that came from her chest was not anger. It was something harder, something that had to be harder than love. "Stop." He froze, bewildered, watching as his mother's golden form grew smaller against the endless savanna. His cries followed her into the morning. "Mama! Mama!" The sound pierced through the wind, through the distance, through the careful walls she had built around what remained of her heart. Once, just once, Zuri paused and glanced back. For a single second, Ethan saw it through his lens, the war written across her face, maternal instinct straining against survival's brutal mathematics. Her body trembled with the effort of not turning around. Then she disappeared into the golden grass, and Kivuli's cries faded to nothing but wind. By midday, Zuri had rejoined the pride with her 2 remaining cubs. Amara approached, examined them, and gave a single nod of acceptance. The isolation was over. The price had been paid. Miles away, in the shelter of thorns, Kivuli cried until his voice broke into ragged silence. He curled into himself, a small dark knot against the earth, waiting for a sound that would never come. As night fell, his eyes remained open, watching the horizon where his mother had vanished. Through his scope, Ethan lowered his head into his hands. "She left him," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Oh God! She actually left him." Ethan had not slept. He drove out before the sun broke the horizon, his hands tight on the wheel, telling himself he was only going to document, to record what nature had decided. But he knew he was lying. When he reached the thorn patch, Kivuli was still there, curled in the exact spot where his mother had left him. The small body barely moved. His breathing came in shallow, irregular gasps. Flies had begun to gather around his nose and eyes. Ethan knelt at a distance, his hands shaking so badly he had to press them against his thighs. The radio crackled. Grace's voice came through, tight with concern. "Ethan, don't. You know the rules. Nature's already decided." He stared at the dying cub, at the way the morning light caught on black fur now dulled with dust and abandonment. "Then I'll lose my permit, Grace," he said, his voice breaking. "But I can't lose my humanity." He approached slowly, each step a choice he could not take back. When Kivuli's eyes opened, they were glazed with exhaustion and dehydration, but aware, too weak to run, too weak to fear, just aware enough to see. Ethan knelt beside him and carefully lifted the small body, wrapping him in his jacket. "I've got you now," he whispered. "You're safe." The cub made no sound, only pressed slightly into the warmth, an instinct older than thought. The drive to the sanctuary blurred into desperate motion. Ethan talked constantly, his voice a lifeline he threw into the space between life and death. "Stay with me. Just stay with me. You're going to be okay. I promise you're going to be okay." Every few seconds he glanced down, checking for the faint rise and fall of breath beneath the jacket. Grace was waiting at the clinic, her expression torn between professional disapproval and something softer. She worked in silence, saline drip, antibiotics, formula administered drop by careful drop. The night stretched long and uncertain. Kivuli's breathing would steady, then falter, then steady again, as if he could not quite decide whether to fight or surrender. Around midnight, something shifted. The breathing became regular, deeper. Grace stepped back, wiping her hands on her coat. "He's ours now, Ethan," she said quietly. "We can never put him back. You understand that?" Ethan rested his hand on the tiny ribcage, feeling the heartbeat beneath, fragile but persistent. "Then we'll give him a life worth living." Outside, thunder rolled across the plains. The first drops of rain began to fall, breaking the long drought, washing the dust from the golden grass. Inside the clinic, under a cone of yellow light, a black cub slept and breathed and lived, pulled back from the edge by hands that chose mercy over rules. Ethan watched him through the night and whispered the words that had become a promise. "I see you, little shadow, and I won't let you disappear." The first month was measured in small victories. Kivuli learned to drink from a bottle, his weak suckling gradually growing stronger. He took his first unsteady steps across the clinic floor, wobbling like something newly assembled. And one evening, as Ethan stroked his head, a sound emerged from deep in his chest. A purr, soft and tentative, but unmistakably alive. By the second month, personality broke through survival. Kivuli played with anything that moved: Ethan's bootlaces, falling leaves, his own tail. He followed Ethan everywhere, a small dark shadow that Grace watched with increasing concern. "You're imprinting him," she warned. "He'll never know he's a lion." But Ethan couldn't pull away, and perhaps didn't want to. Month 3 brought the move to the larger rehabilitation enclosure. When Kivuli's paws touched real grass for the first time, he froze, then pounced on it as if it might escape. Ethan laughed, a sound that felt foreign after so many heavy weeks, and thought maybe, just maybe, they'd done the right thing. The photograph changed everything. A visiting journalist captured Kivuli at 6 months, standing against a golden sunset, his blue eyes luminous and defiant. Within days, the image had gone viral. "The Black Lion of Hope," they called him. News segments aired across continents. Documentary crews arrived. Donations flooded in, enough to fund the sanctuary for years. Kivuli became a symbol, and Ethan felt the weight of that transformation like stones in his chest. Pride mixed with guilt. They'd saved a life, yes, but turned it into spectacle. Time moved faster now. 6 months became a year. A year became 18 months. The small cub grew into something magnificent: powerful shoulders, lean muscle, a black mane beginning to emerge like smoke around his face. But something else grew too: restlessness. Shadow, as everyone called him now, paced the fence line every evening, his eyes always turning east, toward the wild, toward something he'd never known but somehow remembered. At 18 months, Shadow released his first full roar. The sound rolled across the sanctuary and beyond, deep and resonant, carrying longing in every vibration. Ethan stood at the fence, tears streaming down his face, understanding with brutal clarity that they couldn't keep him forever. Grace appeared beside him, her voice quiet. "He's not ours anymore, Ethan, if he ever was." By year 2, the debate had begun in earnest. Conservation boards, donors, scientists, all arguing whether a human-raised lion could survive release. Ethan watched Shadow pace, watched how his magnificent body moved with purpose toward nowhere, and knew the answer. "He's not living," Ethan said one evening. "He's just waiting." And in the east, beyond the fences and the safety and the cameras, the Serengeti waited too, vast and golden and unforgiving, calling its lost son home. After 4 years of debate, paperwork, and political maneuvering, permission finally came. Shadow would be released into a protected zone in the eastern Serengeti, monitored but wild, free but watched. The media descended like locusts, cameras, reporters, politicians eager to attach themselves to the miracle. Everyone wanted to witness the moment when Hope walked back into the wild. Ethan and Grace stayed apart from the circus, focusing only on Shadow, who waited in the transport cage with a calmness that suggested he'd been preparing for this his entire life. The release site was a clearing where golden grass met acacia trees, where the land opened into endless possibility. When the cage door lifted with a metallic groan, Shadow did not rush forward. He paused at the threshold, one massive paw raised, as if testing the boundary between captivity and freedom. For years since he'd felt wild earth beneath his feet. For years since his mother had walked away. The cameras clicked and whirred, but Ethan heard none of it. Shadow turned his head and looked back. One final time, their eyes locking across the small distance that held everything they had been to each other. Ethan nodded, his throat too tight for words, but Shadow understood. "Go home, Kivuli," Ethan whispered. "It's time." Shadow stepped forward, slow, deliberate, every movement carrying the weight of royalty. He paused once more at the edge of the tall grass and released a soft, breathy sound. Not quite a roar, something gentler, something that might have been gratitude or goodbye or simply acknowledgement. Then he walked into the golden waves and vanished, his black fur swallowed by the savanna as if the land had been waiting to reclaim him all along. Ethan stood watching long after there was nothing left to see, tears falling silently, his hands empty of everything but hope and fear. The crowd eventually dispersed, chasing their stories, but he remained, staring at the place where Shadow had disappeared into his own destiny. The weeks that followed brought small reassurances. Tracking data showed paw prints near the river. Camera traps captured images at dusk, a dark shape moving through the golden grass with purpose and grace. Signs of successful hunting appeared. Shadow was surviving, perhaps even thriving, though he hunted alone. Ethan drove out daily, watching from his old ridge, never interfering, just bearing witness the way he'd once promised himself he would. When Grace prepared to leave for her university position, their final embrace carried the weight of everything they'd been through. "You gave him what nature took away," she said quietly. "A chance. That's enough." Her parting gift was a journal, worn leather with a simple inscription inside. "Nature remembers kindness, even when we forget it." Ethan pressed his hand against the words and wondered if Shadow remembered too. If somewhere in that magnificent black-maned head, there lived a memory of hands that had chosen mercy when the world had chosen abandonment. Months had passed since the release, and Shadow had settled into a pattern. Successful hunts, territorial markings, all the behaviors of a thriving male. But he remained alone. No pride, no coalition, just a solitary black figure moving through the golden world. Ethan still watched from his ridge most evenings, unable to fully let go. The radio crackled just before sunset. Large pride approaching from the eastern hills. 6 females, couple of juveniles. Ethan raised his binoculars, scanning the treeline. The pride emerged slowly, moving toward the shallow river to drink. The lead lioness stepped into the fading light, and Ethan's breath caught in his chest. A distinctive mark beneath her left eye, older now but unmistakable. "Zuri," he whispered. The pride drank, unaware they were being watched from 2 directions. Then movement stirred in the opposite treeline. A massive male emerged, his black mane streaked with copper in the dying light, his body radiating power and confidence. Shadow. Fully mature, breathtaking, every inch an alpha. He approached the pride slowly, head lowered in non-threatening posture, but his size alone commanded attention. The pride stiffened immediately. Amara's daughter, now matriarch, snarled a warning. The younger females formed a defensive line. But Zuri held her position, staring at the approaching stranger with an intensity that froze everyone else in place. Shadow stopped 10 feet away. For years collapsed into seconds. Zuri stepped forward, tentative, her nose lifting to scent the air. Her body language shifted, defensive to confused to something deeper, something that reached past conscious thought into memory written in bone and blood. She moved closer, until they were nose to nose, this massive black male and the golden lioness who had once carried him inside her body. The sound she made was unlike anything Ethan had ever heard, half growl, half purr. A mother's voice recognizing what should have been lost forever. She pressed her forehead against his chest, exactly where infant Kivuli used to sleep, exactly where he'd pressed his face that last morning before she walked away. Shadow lowered his head over hers, protective and gentle, and the circle that had been broken 4 years ago closed again. The pride watched, uncertain, but made no move to attack. Ethan's radio crackled. Grace's voice, breathless. She'd flown back when the tracking data showed the convergence. Ethan, is that? He couldn't speak for a moment, his vision blurred. It's her, he finally managed. She remembers. After everything, she remembers. The two lions stood together as the sun bled out across the horizon, painting them in shades of gold and shadow. Mother and son, separated by survival, reunited by something stronger than instinct. Then, moving as one, they turned toward the darkening plains and walked side by side into the tall grass. The pride followed, accepting what nature had once rejected. And on a distant ridge, a man wept for joy, for mercy, for the impossible proof that some bonds transcend even the wild's cruelest mathematics. Years had passed, and Ethan was grayer now, his movements slower, but he still returned to the ridge at sunset. It had become ritual, sitting in the same spot where he'd first witnessed Zuri give birth, where he'd first seen the impossible cub that rewrote everything he thought he knew about mercy and survival. One evening, as the light turned copper and gold, movement caught his eye near the riverbank. He raised his binoculars with hands that had steadied with age and acceptance. A large black-maned lion stood on an outcrop, his profile carved against the dying sun. Behind him, 3 younger lions moved, their coats a mixture of golden and dark, genetic testimony to their father's unique bloodline. And beside Shadow, moving with the grace of years and wisdom, walked Zuri. Older now, her muzzle touched with gray, but still his. Still the mother who had chosen him twice, once in birth, once in reunion. The family stood together on the ridge, silhouetted against the horizon. A pride anchored by an impossible bond, thriving where survival should have written a different ending. Shadow lifted his head and roared. The sound rolled across the plains like thunder, deep and resonant, carrying not warning or challenge but something purer. Triumph, joy, life affirming itself against every odd. Ethan opened his worn journal and wrote his final entry with hands that trembled slightly. He was born from darkness, rejected by instinct, saved by mercy. He walked between 2 worlds and found light in both. If love exists beyond reason, it must live here, in the space where the wild forgives. He closed the book and smiled through tears that felt earned. You made it home, Kivuli, he whispered. You're finally home. The book came months later, The Lion Born in Darkness. Its cover showing two silhouettes on a ridge, one golden, one black, side by side against an African sunset. The dedication page read simply, "To Zuri, who taught me what a mother's love can endure. To Kivuli, who showed me what it means to survive it." Travelers still report sightings. The black-maned lion of the eastern Serengeti, who walks with his elderly mother at dusk. Their pride a living testament to bonds that transcend biology. Grace's voice, recorded for the audiobook, speaks with quiet conviction. They said it was impossible. That lions don't remember. That instinct always wins. But Ethan taught us something science sometimes forgets. Ethan's voice joins hers, weathered but certain. Love has no color. And mercy. Mercy is the only law that truly matters. The final shot shows an empty ridge at sunset, wind moving through golden grass that bends and rises like breathing. In the distance, a roar carries on the wind, deep, powerful, alive. Then silence, and the slow fade to black, leaving only the truth that some stories don't end. They simply become part of the land, written in dust and memory and the impossible geometry of hearts that refuse to forget. Shadow's journey proves that love has no color, and mercy can rewrite what seems impossible. What lesson are you taking from this story? Drop it in the comments below. Your words inspire the next story we tell. And if you want more journeys like this one, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because there are more incredible stories waiting. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing in second chances.